Tonight, the NAACP is holding a memorial service for Len and Lacey. Both are charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the district attorney says he expects additional charges to be added on. Today, I sat down with Laura and Eric Trump while they were here in Wrightsville Beach. As of last Thursday, the group had already raised about $150,000, but today the school says the tragedy has brought them closer together. Well, it's officially spring, and that means it's officially tourism season. Coming up, find out what the port city will be grilling this holiday weekend. Those that won last night will be continuing their campaigns to the general election on November 8th. The program brings 4 groups of dogs into the prison each year to work with the inmates. Today was all about girls. Skating legend Tony Hawk is doing his part to help skate dreams come true for kids here at Ogden Park. Removal is well underway here at the Sutton Coal Ash Basin. Folks eagerly waiting on the beach, watching the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office patrolling the ocean, looking for the shark or sharks responsible. Today, family and Civil War reenactors gathered to celebrate the life of a Union veteran 150 years after his death. Sergeant Albert E. Higley of the 22nd New York Volunteers and the 16th New York Heavy Artillery left his home to fight for the Union cause in the Civil War.
Albert enlisted in the Union Army in May of 1861, 1 month after the firing on Fort Sumter, and essentially he served throughout the course of the war.
He never returned.
He was here in Wilmington in March of 1865 and was working in a hospital in one of the local churches when he contracted typhoid fever and died on March 31st, 1865, just a couple weeks before the end of the war.
But today, Higley's family was able to honor him for the first time in 150 years, thanking him for his service and celebrating his life.
It's funny to have lived most of my life kind of knowing this person that you could never get to know face to face.
His family was able to connect with him across the decades through his diaries. And they shared those memoirs with Civil War reenactors from the state of New York.
You know, seeing how they lived and seeing how, their uniforms and accoutrements and the hardships that they went to, it brings it out of just reading a history book.
Higley's journal entries and letters not only touched his family, but others as well.
You know, he's a fellow veteran and he fought for the Union. He's a New Yorker just as much as I'm a New Yorker. I fought in Afghanistan with the New York Army National Guard, and being here, supporting and honoring a federal soldier who is buried deep in, at what the time when he passed was enemy territory.
And now finally, Higley received the honors he went without for over a century. It caught my attention back in November, a 70-year-old sex offender using his time spent in the service as a mitigating factor for a more lenient sentence. That man, Clyde Way, was sentenced to just 58 days in jail, but he did not have to serve it all at once. And that case was not an anomaly. So I set out to look at how our veterans are treated in court.
Get off the car!
It's a video that's hard to forget. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Adam Kanash brutally attacking a Surf City cab driver back in 2013. After pleading guilty to assault inflicting serious injury, Kanash was sentenced to 5 years probation. His military service and subsequent post-traumatic stress disorder used as a mitigating factor.
North Carolina General Statute 15A-1340. .16.
That law allows the defense to consider a veteran's honorable discharge when discussing sentencing in open court.
If someone has some traumatic experience or catastrophic stress that would lead to a symptom such as PTSD, it would be helpful to a judge in sentencing in terms of what treatment may be available or in terms of the length of an active sentence.
But when should service come into play in a court of law?
I think it's appropriate in any charge where a person accused of a crime has served honorably in our armed services.
That could mean anything from traffic violations to violent crimes. For District Attorney Ben David, it has to have relevance.
I think in terms of which cases, you primarily see it in a couple of really big contexts. One is drug offenses, possession cases, and ones involving, it usually starts out with prescription drugs for things like pain, and then it graduates into other harder substances, for instance, heroin, cocaine, things like that. The other thing that we see is sometimes because of the post-traumatic stress It shows up with domestic violence situations, with issues involving their spouses, their girlfriends, things like that.
But as Judge Ola Lewis explains, military service does not single-handedly influence a ruling.
Both the aggravating factors and mitigating factors are merely tools of the trade.
Things like severity of the crime and prior criminal records also influence a sentence.
I think there is an increased awareness of the fact that we have more veterans coming through the system.
But the question remains, should honorable military service have any influence on criminal punishments? David says veterans are not the only people who sometimes receive consideration based on factors not involved with a crime.
We do that with young children committing offenses. We do that with older folks who might be experiencing a whole different type of challenge because of, for instance, dementia or senility.
David says it's not special treatment.
Along the whole continuum of people coming through the criminal justice system, it's important to treat everyone consistently, that is, with equal protection and fairness, but you also have to look at the unique facts of each case.
And Judge Lewis insists this is not a free pass for servicemen and women.
It is certainly not a get-out-of-jail-free card for members who served honorably in our armed services protecting our freedoms.
So after all this talk from legal experts, how do veterans feel about this defense? I sat down with John Burns. He served in Somalia with the Marine Corps, in Afghanistan and Iraq with the Army National Guard, and was even deployed to Ground Zero on September 11th, 2001.
Well, you know, I don't think veterans deserve, because they have the V after their name, any particular special treatment.
Burns remains active in the military community today through organizations like the American Legion, VFW, and Concerned Veterans for America, to name a few. He says military service as a mitigating factor is really a symptom of a much larger problem.
I personally see the whole veterans leniency issue in light of a major need for criminal justice reform in our country and in our state overall.
Burns is not denying that veterans can have circumstances that are different from someone who has not served, but being a veteran and having PTSD are not mutually exclusive.
Every rape victim, every victim of sexual abuse or child abuse, many law enforcement officers all have post-traumatic stress.
Burns says veterans courts are a possible way to start reform of the entire criminal justice system, but he says vets should not be singled out for long-time special treatment. He says there are plenty of people, veterans and civilians alike, who would benefit from therapy rather than incarceration. And what about Clyde Way, the man who used his service as part of his defense in a Brunswick County child sex assault case?
And that's the kind of place where leniency, because of any life circumstance, is not appropriate. Whether they served in, in the Army in Vietnam, or they served as a scout, an Eagle Scout and a Scout leader later in life.
Burns, David, and Lewis agree that the goal of any legal punishment is to prevent the criminal from repeating the offense.
Today marks 3 weeks since 30-year-old Ebony Spears went missing here in Wilmington.
The mother last spoke with her daughter on January 15th, but the search is still ongoing, and WWAY's Taylor Yakowenko joins us now with more from the Q Center for Missing People. It is the big story at 5. Taylor.
Mackenzie, Ebony Spears was last seen at the Point at Taylor Estates last month. There is now a $3,000 reward offered for anyone who knows the whereabouts of the Wilmington mom, but that ends on Tuesday. Monica Kaysen, the founder of the center, says she hopes the reward will encourage someone to come forward with information about Spears. She says the most important thing right now is getting the word out to as many people as possible, because you never know who may have seen or heard something that might help find Spears. And there are a lot of missing pieces still in this case.
With any missing person, it just basically, sometimes there just is no information, and that information has to be built, and that obviously takes longer, and that's pretty much where, Ebony's case is so far, there really hasn't been anybody that really saw anything or that saw her, hours before her disappearance.
Kaysen says if you have any information, you can remain anonymous both through text a tip with Wilmington Police and on the Q Center website. And Kaysen says even though they haven't found her, they are not considering the search to be unsuccessful. She says when they walked out of the woods last week, the first thing that someone said was, well, we know where she's not.